Hey folks, this is Steve. It's Module 11, and Module 11 is about creating curb appeal using Feng Shui. Now, no matter if you're trying to sell a house or just staying there and reaping the benefits of doing a really good job with the Feng Shui, curb appeal really has a big part to play. You know at this point that the curb appeal and how we attract energy is very important. We need to attract ongoing, nourishing qi all the time, consistently, 24/7, to the front door, into the house. By doing this, we're making sure that our house is going to be giving us all that it should. It should be making us more productive, healthier, and so forth. But of course, with respect to selling a house, it is also very pivotal. And when you do Feng Shui and you do the job you should be doing, the curb appeal, you're going to find out that the photographs that you put on the internet are going to be much more appealing, much more attracting. And of course, since a lot of people nowadays look for homes on the internet first, actually close to 90%, if the photos are really attracting and they stop somebody from changing to another house to look at and make them take a longer look, you're going to get a lot more attention and a lot more looks. So it really is extremely beneficial for selling a house or just for staying. You want to make it as attractive as possible. So what gives good curb appeal? Well, normally I would think a lot of people would say the following: a well-kept yard, well-kept house, nothing in the driveway, the exterior paint looks great, okay? But when you're selling, and even if you're not selling, if you really want to get the most out of your home, you want to use Feng Shui. Feng Shui is really going to be very beneficial in giving you the correct feeling. And the 4 tools that we have now spent all this time and effort on are going to be used now outside. So we're going to talk about flow again. We're going to talk about the yin-yang theory again, and the 5 elements, and of course the Bagua. All of them very, very pivotal in getting the feeling that we want, getting the attention that we want. Now the flow, again, needs to be using more of the meandering pattern. This goes with respect to your sidewalks, your pathways. You want to get away from straight lines and perpendicular lines. Those are very, very man-made, and they're not natural. Feng Shui is all about being natural. And if you see the left-hand side, again, we want to stay away from very forceful situations. And the right-hand side on this slide, anything stagnant. We want to keep the energy moving and flowing. So putting it in a meandering pattern is very, very positive. We want to stay away from frustration, whether it's the frustration of our energy, the qi, getting into the house, or the frustration of somebody finding the front door and finding the way to get there. So you can imagine if you're trying to sell a house and the person is not totally sure where to enter, that doesn't help with getting them emotionally tied in. So if you look at these houses, you're having some difficulty finding the pathway. Even though they're there, it's just not that obvious. So we want to make the movement of the energy, the movement of our visitors, very obvious. We don't want to frustrate people. So in both of these cases, it's pretty easy to find the front door. It's pretty easy to find the pathway. And that is very important. So there are remedies for flow problems outside that work very nicely. We can introduce light. We can add some sound. We can change the colors and give that contrast, which is basically raising your hand and saying, over here, over here. We can use life, and we can consider different types of movement. And if you look at these pictures, the bird bath represents sound, movement, life. Of course, the water fountain, and even the wind chime. Wind chimes can definitely represent movement and sound for you and raising the energy. Now, the shape of the garden is important. You want to please the person who is looking at it, whether it's yourself or your visitors. You want to make sure it comes off as very pleasing. And the best kind of shapes are very curvy. You want to use circular beds, curved beds, and you want to stay away from a lot of straight pathways. That straight pathway might be helpful in some cases when there is not an awful lot of energy in a part of the lot, but in most cases you stay away from straight pathways. The edging can come into play quite a bit too. If you have a curved walkway and the energy is moving a little too fast, you can allow your edging to be a little bit more chaotic, you might say, and let it feather over top of the walkway to slow things down a little bit. The shape of your beds on both sides can have an awful lot to do with it too. You don't want them to be all the same size. You want it to be the larger, of course, in the back, medium in the middle, and come all the way down to the walkway as being smaller. That feathering actually helps with the movement of the energy. Now, there are several things that I consider important to not do. Again, you want to mirror nature. You want it to be natural. So you stay away from things like giant blocks or squares or shrubbery. We don't want ever the house or a business to look like a fortress. We want it to be comfortable. We don't want to use soldiering, which is odd and unnatural. We want to consider proportion when we're talking about really everything, but you're going to see it a lot in some of the photos with plants and pots. And we certainly don't want to use house hugging. And we'll get into that in just a moment, which again gives that fortress look. Here's an example of soldiering. And what I mean by soldiering is buying a few flowers or a few plants and lining them up like this. It's very unnatural. If you only have so much money to spend on using color in your beds, okay, congregate them in particular areas and give a big burst of color in that area. Group them together, but don't line them up like this and try to get as much out of it as you possibly can. It's not natural. Always think of making it look natural. Now, proportion comes into play in a lot of ways. I hope you can see on the left-hand side, bottom left, that those two particular shrubs have gotten out of hand. They're too big for the front of the house. They were never meant to get this big. And you notice they also take away a lot of the natural light that enters or should be entering into this house. And you're going to see a photo or two that actually gets up to the point where they go up to the second floor and do the same thing. The one on the far right, top right, you might be saying, well, what's wrong with this proportion? Well, anytime you have plants that are framing the door like this, and you have to somehow work your way around them to get through the door, they're too much. You want to make sure that the entrance is always very easy to get in and out of, and you don't have to worry about brushing up next to a plant. This particular picture, several folks sometimes have trouble even figuring out what the proportion problem is. and it's not particularly beautiful. But the problem in here is the little pots that are framing the door. They're very, very out of proportion to the other extreme with this gorgeous double door. The proportion can go in either direction. House hugging. This actually starts when you plant your trees and your bushes, and you planted them too close to the house, and you create this hugging or fortress-like look. Notice the bottom left, we have a beautiful Japanese maple on the right-hand side, but it was planted too close to the house and probably in a poor location. And it takes away a lot of the natural light in that particular dining room on the first floor, in that bedroom on the second floor. Not something we want. It's also too close on the other side too. You're always wanting to leave room between the house and your plantings so that the energy can move and move easily. The one on the top right is a house that is worth over $1 million, believe it or not. And again, they didn't take care of the shrubbery in a particular way. And it gives, again, a very unfriendly look and creates a problem for any natural light getting into this very beautiful house. Now, this yin and yang idea and the contrast idea is going to be worked with in your curb appeal also. The coleus up at the top right have contrast, same type of plant basically, but the contrast adds some curiosity, some interest, some excitement. The one on the bottom left does not do any of that. You want to make sure that whatever you plant gives some excitement to it. Here's a couple of pictures from a botanical garden that I had worked at. And the one on the left, I took the picture so that you could see some shade and see some open area. It is to your benefit to try to have both in your front and your backyard. You would like to have places or periods of shade, and you would like to have some periods where it's very open and a little more sunny. The energy in this situation is a little more balanced. When it moves through a shaded area, like you see on the to the left, it actually slows down somewhat. But then it starts to pick up speed in an open area, which is very sunny. Now the one on the right, I took that picture in that botanical garden so that I could show you the poker plants, the orange, which are very pointy and represents some fire. Just another way to bring in fire. But again, you see there's a lot of bright sunshine, so the energy is really moving quickly in that particular picture. Now I have a thing about dyed mulch or using things like crushed brick. They're not natural. So the bedding should be of certain contrast with respect to the outside of the house. This bedding, in a lot of cases, actually blends in with the exterior of the house and creates an unnatural look. Now, using the bagua over top of your yard can be very helpful sometimes. And the house, in this particular example, is in the health area. Certainly all of our lots are not going to have the same situation. But it gives me a good example for you to show you that in the front of the house, the far right-hand corner down close to the street is helpful people. Dominant element is metal. The center of the house is career. Dominant element is water. And then to the left, where knowledge or wisdom or spirituality is, the dominant element is earth. And those all help us with respect to coming up with color schemes and where things go. Now, this particular house of a picture I took in Charlotte, North Carolina. To the right was, again, healthful people. And it is actually showing that element very nicely with the white flowers, because metal being dominant, white is a color that gives us that element. But also the circular bed also represents metal also. So you can get that dominant element quite easily by a lot of different ways. Let's go over particular ways that you can get the element that you're looking for. So if you're trying to get a little more earth into a particular part of your outside, you can use shapes that are flat, square, or rectangular. You can certainly use colors of browns and beiges and yellow. Rocks, stone statues and benches, maybe a rock garden, the type of planter you're using, square tiles give you also earth. So there's a lot of ways to bring earth in to a place that it needs it. The way to add metal are using shapes like circles and arches, spheres. The colors are whites and grays and other metallic colors like brass and bronze. Metal wind chimes are something that I use a lot of. Metal archways going into a garden can work very nicely. The type of fence that you have, different types of art. And all of these pictures, of course, represent metal in particular ways for you. To get the fire element, red flowers, of course, work perfectly, as do orange flowers. The shapes are pointed and triangular. Outdoor lights give you the fire element, a barbecue pit. The types of trellises that you use all give you the fire element. To add water, you want to use wavy or curvy shapes, like you see in the left-hand picture at the bottom. That was taken at the Biltmore House. And those are all the same type of plant. It's just that they decided to put a wavy pattern in it, which represents water. The colors are blue and black. The purple flowers will also give you that color. So if you have blue flowers or purple flowers, that give you the water element also. Of course, ponds and waterfalls and bird baths, all of those kind of things will give you water also if you need it. The wood element is actually a very easy one to get into your front yard, backyard, or wherever. Columns and tall rectangular shapes work just fine. Of course, the color green, which is extremely prevalent in most of our yards, trees, wood furniture, structures like that, give you the wood element quite easily. Now, the beds up in front of the house, these are the colors that I like to use. So this slide might be very helpful to you. You want to remember the ratio of 60 to 40. Again, we don't want to go to a wild extreme. Let's stay on the right-hand side. The doorway is in the middle of this particular house, and it's framed by several possible choices, which we'll get to in a second. But on the right of the doorway, the dominant color would probably be more of the yellows or the whites. The whites bring in the metal. The yellow, which is earth, actually encourages metal. So I use a lot of those two colors right there. And I need a contrast color. Again, I want a 60-40, 70-30. The dominant color to the contrast color. So let's say we went with yellow and we went 60% that. The 30 or the 40% could be a blue or purple, or the 40% could be the white. Or you could go to the extreme of making it 70-30. You could also go with white to be the 60 or 70, and then the contrast color could be the blue or the yellow. If you go to the far left-hand corner in wisdom or knowledge, dominant element there is earth. So the dominant color would be either the yellow or the red, because the red encourages earth also. So I would go 60% red or yellow, 70% at the most with red or yellow, and the contrast color would be white. Framing the door, these are your choices. Okay? And a lot of the framing of the door has to do with the exterior color of your house. There are certain times, especially like, say, for example, you have a yellow door, you might want to use the watery colors of the purples or the whites. But often I use the reds or the yellows depending on whatever the exterior color is. If the exterior color is a watery color, I'll go with yellow. If the exterior color is more reddish, like a brick house, I'll also go with the yellow. I don't want it to blend in. I want my pots of flowers to really pop. Now in this case right here, we do have rounded pots, which are again something that I advocate to frame. They're not framing the door, which to me is a problem. I also don't want that particular type of artwork off the door. I don't like three-dimensional stuff coming off of the door. So whether it's a wreath or something like this, I take it off. The color of the door is definitely of a big contrast to the exterior of the house. That works okay. But I put the pots of flowers framing the door nicely. One of the reasons why putting the pots in this place are not real good is that in both situations, whether the person wants to use the railing on the left or the railing on the right, because maybe they're having a little difficulty walking, they can't get to it very easily, so therefore it's a security problem. The same thing happens in this situation too. The pots framing the door are actually in pretty darn good proportion. They probably need a lot more color in the pots. It would have been to their benefit to put some of the yellow in those pots down steps into those pots. So they work pretty well. The contrast of the door to the outside of the house is just fine. But again, the pots that line the steps take away the use of the railings. In this particular situation, I love the double doors. They're very nice, but it's a little too dark. And we don't have any real opportunity to frame the doors very well. So in this case, it really doesn't hurt you to put some pots of flowers on the steps, but I'd put them on one side and not both sides, so somebody could use the railing if they had some difficulty. And usually I would put them on the side of the railing where the traffic is going to see them the easiest, or the chi is going to see them the easiest. So if the traffic was coming from the right side, coming up the street, I would put the pots of flowers on the left-hand side, the left-hand railing. Because the house, again, worth quite a bit of money and not taking care of a lot of things. The pathway is not at all positive. It's not well kept. We have plants that are dying, and anything in Feng Shui that represents death is not good energy. Secondly, you can see the beds are really in bad shape. And you see the stain above the one lantern on the right-hand side. Anything like that is going to turn off any visitor especially a home buyer, and it also is not going to be attracting this whole situation for cheap. The biggest problem in this case is the tree. Certainly a tree this old, this beautiful, is not going to be taken down. I would never advocate that, never. But it is in front of the doorway, and therefore takes away some of the opportunity to be able to see what's coming your way. So what I would do in this case right here is that I would put a gazing ball appropriately, probably somewhere behind the tree somewhat, so that I could see into the gazing ball and see possibly what is coming my way a little easier. I'd also take away that CPI sign if I was selling. Here's an example of people definitely trying to do the right thing, but it doesn't quite come off. The bed is very tired looking. The contrast is very poor with respect to the yard. The yard probably could use some water. Probably hasn't rained there for a while. So, they certainly have tried, but the door is not framed well. And again, we want to make sure that there's better contrast. Same problem with somebody trying to walk up to the door. We're almost trying to make them never come up to the door. So in this case, a person would feel somewhat unstable and also would have difficulty getting between the plants to get up to the door. We've narrowed the pathway. I don't want the wreath on the door either, and certainly the plants out in the bed are all of the same color and don't give us any excitement or interest. In Feng Shui, the things that you frame your doorway with should never be pointy or give any possible opportunity for somebody to get actually hit or touching something that can give them an injury. So when you think about different types of trees that have berries and thorns on them, you don't want them close to the doorway. And in this case, these are not appropriate for framing the door. Unique shaped shrubs are something that, again, are unnatural. And if you're trying to sell a home and this is what you have in your yards, you are creating work for somebody, and it will definitely be something that would hurt their consideration. So anything that's unnatural or unique like this is really not going to get the best impression. Busy streets are certainly not something that is positive for the peace and contentment of somebody living in a home. Sometimes you don't have an awful lot of choice, especially if you're a real estate agent and you're listing a home. You're going to have homes that have backyards or side yards that look like the one on the left. What was actually handled was putting up these lelands on the side of the fence to hide the fence and hide the traffic, but it also was able to curb some of the noise too. It gave them more privacy and more security. Thinking about that classic armchair, you can see where it can be very helpful. Curves create the right feeling. The picture on the left, lovely looking patio, but by extending it out and creating curves around the trees there, you really created a very beautiful, interesting, and exciting environment. Down the bottom left, they started off thinking sort of the right way, but they extended the circles, extended the beds, and put more contrast in, creating a much more positive environment for everybody. Now you're going to run into odd-shaped lots, and in Feng Shui, the best kind of lot for anybody is really more of a square or a rectangle, because the energy comes in and fills it up a lot better, and it stays longer. But when you have a listing or a house that is on a cul-de-sac, often you get a pie-shaped lot like this. So the one on the left, There's not much you can do about that shaped lot for sure, but you can certainly make it more interesting. You can certainly put some curves into it to slow down the energy, get it into more of a meandering pattern, make it more interesting, and you'll find out that it has an awful lot of benefits for you. Different heights are very important in your garden. You don't want them to all be at the same height. It moves the energy a lot better if you use different heights like you see in these pictures. So please consider that idea. The mailbox is something that is quite often overlooked. But even if you're staying in the house, it still is the first impression of your home to the neighbors, to your visitors. So making sure that the mailbox looks really good is a very important thing, especially if you're selling a home. It's quite often their first impression of how you maintain it. Both of these have poor contrast. The one on the bottom especially. The one on the top looks like they gave it some thought, but you can see the soldiering of it. So again, if they had taken that and added some color in big splashes, it would have a lot better contrast and a lot better look. So again, contrast is a very pivotal thing for whether you're staying or you're selling your house. These two houses in Florida are worth quite a bit of money, but neither one of them have a lot of pop. So if somebody was looking in this price range, they might actually just move on and look at another one that actually has more contrast to it. So please keep in mind the idea is important for selling a house, but also getting more energy into the house and getting that special feeling. Now both these pictures, they're hiding some of the best features just by letting some plants overgrow a little bit. So let's cut those back and make sure those good features are really showing well. I hope you can look at this particular slide and start to see that there are certain things that just don't work when you're trying to have good feng shui. The bedding is very unnatural. I know white pebbles and crushed rock and crushed brick are things that some people like to use because they don't want to do some weeding. But a bed can look natural and have very little weeding to be done if you just put a little time and effort into it. So you want to have a natural look. You don't want to go this route, if at all possible. Now, of these two pictures, I think you know which one has got the F grade and the other one has an A+. The one on the top has a little contrast. You can't find the pathway. It causes frustration for us on a subconscious level. The one on the bottom right has everything going for it. It has a beautiful curved walkway and driveway up to the front door. It has softened a lot of the edges in the house. It has got great contrast. It has a lot of beautiful things going for it. In my part of the country, and I'm sure in your part of the country, you do have neighbors that sometimes decide they don't want to ever mow, and so therefore they figure they can get away with doing what you see on the top left. This doesn't really create the type of positive feelings for our energy or for a visitor. So going that route really doesn't work. It might save you a little work, I suppose, but it doesn't work with respect to making your environment a very positive one. It has very little contrast other than we have earth and green plants. They did try a little bit closer to the door to bring in some contrast, but a little bit too late. And of course, the picture on the bottom has some good contrast, but it has that straight walk that we're always trying to stay away from. Now, sharp corners can come into play everywhere. whether it's inside or outside. And in all cases, you're trying to soften them, take them away if possible. So softening a corner, like you see with a lot of the landscaping that you see in these two pictures, gives a much more positive feeling for people that walk up to it. It's much more interesting, much more exciting, and much more inviting. In this picture, you see again a corner of a house softened very beautifully with some nice contrast. The one on the top right is certainly a problem. And you will have homes like this that in some ways are very attractive, but they create a feeling of insecurity somewhat, and also not being very comfortable when you're outside there. In these pictures right here, you can see an awful lot of work went into that landscaping. The contrast also is lacking. You can't find the door very easily, or at least the pathway to the door. The one on the right, I wanted to show you where a pot of very colorful flowers would be a very advantageous place to put, to make the chi coming down that walkway turn towards the double door. Definitely that door needs work. It needs to be framed with some beautiful flowers. But the one thing I want you to get out of that picture is where the pot goes. Now even your backyard can be softened and made beautiful. A corner all by itself without these plants would not look anywhere near as nice as this. So this softened very nicely this squared off backyard. You put in the curves. You gave us the different heights of the landscaping. Anytime you can have plants that grow over something that takes away sharpness or straight lines is a very soothing and very positive environment for a person. So consider using things like this to take that away. Here's a house that was built in the 70s. It has a lot of sharp edges to it. But luckily their bedding does do some of the things that we want them to do. It does take away some of the sharp edges. It does create the meandering look, meandering flow to it. Now look at this particular picture. I hope you'll agree with me that nothing really stands out on this street. These houses are very, very lovely, but they all blend in together. And no matter if you're trying to sell or you're trying to stay and attract a lot of positive nourishment into your house, you want to make sure it stands out. Now, if you're thinking about putting a water fountain in, there are certain places that are good and certain places that are not so good for them. The center front of your house, if you remember when we laid the bagua over the whole yard, is in the career area, which is dominant water. So center front, like you see in the top right picture, is a good place for a water fountain. Another good place to put one would be in the back left, where is the wealth area, or dominant wood, and wood of course grows because of water. So those are the best places for it. The worst places for putting a water fountain would be in the back center, which is dominant fire in the reputation area. And it's also not real great to put it in a place like the front left, which is earth, and earth muddies water, if you remember correctly. When you put a water fountain in, try to make sure that the water either moves towards the house or it is neutral, goes up and comes right back down. You don't want the water to go away from the house. That represents your wealth leaving in Feng Shui. Wind chimes are something that can be very advantageous for you to raise energy and to calm energy. And I use a metal wind chime quite often under an eave, like you see in this picture to the left, in the helpful people area in the front of the house. So when you're looking at the door, let's say it's in the center of the house, to the right is your helpful people area. I like putting a metal wind chime there, calling helpful people into my life, into my clients' lives, to also raise energy. Wind chimes come in a lot of different materials. If you have a wooden wind chime, I think you now know where I would probably put that. It's a good place in the wealth area in the back. So consider the elements whenever you decide to put a wind chime in. It'll be very helpful to you. Even the real estate sign, if you're selling, there's good places and worse places for them. The best place to put a real estate sign would be in the helpful people area of the front yard. So if you're at the street facing the entrance, let's say it's in the middle, to the right would be the best place. The second best place would be to the left of the front door in wisdom or knowledge. The last place that I'd put it would be in the center of the house, because I don't want anything possibly taking away from the front door. Now, if you look at the two real estate signs, one is parallel to the street. That is the worst thing to do. You're not using both sides of the sign, for one thing. But secondly, if you put it at a right angle, like you see in the bottom right, it actually catches chi a lot easier. And people can see the sign from both sides. So you put it at a perpendicular angle to the street. So as I said, the best place to put a real estate sign would be, or an open house sign, would be in helpful people, number one. Number two would be wisdom. And if you have to, because of, let's say a driveway, circular driveway, you put it in the center, but make sure it's always perpendicular to the street. Making sure the street sign shows really well. You can go all out. You want to draw continual attention. So using lights are something that I like using, especially solar lights, where it, of course, gets the energy and then shows pretty much all evening. It's something that to me is very advantageous. So I like using lights very much. But I also use movement and color. You need to be creative. Most of the real estate agents that are listening have certainly used balloons and used flags and whirlybirds and everything. The color of the sign can be very, very important. And if you have a sign like you see at the bottom left, you got a problem a little bit because your sign blends in. And again, I don't want anything blending in. I want it to pop. I want contrast. I had a company that had green and gold signs, and it really was a problem until we changed. So make sure your signs pop, and if you have to, surround them with flowers and surround them with light, but make sure they really, really show. So let's go through a quick checklist and making sure that you feel comfortable with what we've talked about. You want to have curves, a lot of curves in your front yard and in your side and backyard, but especially in your front yard. You want to stay away from straight lines and perpendicular lines as much as possible. Use a lot of color and contrast, and we've given you guidelines of how to pick the color out. If you have a real estate sign, make sure it is greatly, greatly noticed. Please consider proportion. Make sure it is well maintained, and you certainly want to make sure that everything looks natural. So, you want to use the bagua first. That'll give you the dominant element for each quadrant up front. You want to manipulate the chi real well. You want to get it into a meandering pattern. You want to make sure that your yard does not look cluttered at all. Make sure they can find the pathway, and of course, don't ever hide the front door. Consider each quadrant's purpose, and yes, boy, is it ever, curb appeal is very, very critical, whether you're selling or you are staying in your home.